Creating animations from static images inside Photoshop doesn't require as much work as you might think. In this lesson, we'll create a basic animation and save it as a QuickTime movie. Let's get started by going to our Chapter 9 folder and opening the file titled FGA. At the bottom of the screen here, I've got my animation panel open from the previous lesson. If yours is not on screen, I want you to go up to the Window menu and select Animation. The file you're looking at here is a logo provided by the Fort Greene Tennis Association in lovely Brooklyn, New York, so thanks for that, guys. And before we jump in and get started, I want to verify one very important thing. This animation panel is in the timeline mode, and I want you to verify that you are in the timeline mode as well. There's an icon here at the bottom right with 3 rectangles. If you do not see this icon and instead see this icon, I want you to click here to put you in timeline mode. Photoshop offers 2 distinct ways of working with animations. There's a frame animation mode and a timeline mode. We're going to be working in the timeline mode. It gives you a lot more flexibility, and it's one of the more efficient ways to work inside Photoshop with animations. Now notice that this file is comprised of a number of separate individual layers. We can see them here in the Layers panel. I can toggle them off so you can see Ball, Fort Greene, Tennis, Association, and Brooklyn. Turn these back on. It's very important that each of these exist on their own layer. Why? Well, in this animation, we're going to be doing different things to each individual layer. Notice that each layer has a corresponding element in the animation panel here. So we've got Ball, Fort Greene, Tennis, all the same items that are showing up in our Layers panel are in our timeline. I'm going to press F to take us into full screen mode here, and then press the space bar to bring up the hand tool, and just to put this nicely in the center here. Now, creating animations in Photoshop is a lot easier, as I mentioned before, than you may think, but it does require some planning ahead on your part. You really have to be organized and know where you're going with this. Here we have the image in a finished state, meaning that this is what the animation is going to look like at the very end. We're seeing right now how all of the elements are going to appear at the very end of the animation. And it's important to recognize this because that very fact is going to determine how and where we make movements and adjustments to these individual layers. If I highlight a layer in the Layers panel, that corresponding element is highlighted in the timeline, and vice versa. So you can either click to activate a layer here, or you can activate it in the timeline menu. Whichever one your mouse is closer to is best. Now what we're going to be doing with these animations is working with something called keyframes. Keyframes are crucial to working efficiently with animations, and let me show you how they're going to work. We're going to start with the Fort Greene layer here, and we're going to do something very simple to it. If I click open this disclosure triangle here, you'll see that we've got 3 options for position, opacity, and style. These are the buttons we're going to click on to add keyframes. For Fort Greene, we're going to work just with one of these. We're going to work with opacity. Notice along the top of this animation panel, we have our units of measurement in red. These are all indicating the seconds of our animation. I'm going to take the timeline marker and move over to the 2-second mark. At this 2-second mark, we want the Fort Greene element here to be positioned exactly where it is at a 100% opacity. Okay? Pretty straightforward. But 2 seconds before this, we want this to simply fade in from 0% to 100%. And this is how we do it with keyframes. We're concerned with opacity, so I'm going to click this stopwatch icon next to opacity, and that's going to place a keyframe mark here at the 2-second mark. What this means is that at the 2-second mark, this Fort Greene opacity of 100%. How do we know it's 100%? Well, we can look here at the opacity value in the Layers panel. Now what we want to do is have this start at the 0-second mark with an opacity of 0%, and here's how we do it. I'm going to take the timeline marker, drag this over to 0, which is the very beginning of our animation, and at this point I'm going to go in the Layers panel and change opacity. I'll click on the word to select it and type in 0. I'll press the enter or return key to commit to that, and you can see a second keyframe has been added here. What this means is that At the 0-second mark at the very beginning of our animation, Fort Greene is going to be at 0%, and it's going to gradually build up until at the 2-second mark it's at 100%. Now, how fast is it going to build up? How exactly is that going to happen? That's the beauty of keyframes. Photoshop is going to determine all of that. All we need to tell Photoshop with keyframes is our start and end points and their values. So we want this to start at 0% at the beginning of the animation, and then at the 2-second mark, we want this to be at 100%. That's the essence of keyframes. Pretty simple example. Let's take another one here that's a bit more complex. We'll go next to the tennis layer here. And again, I'll open the disclosure triangle. I'll scroll this down a little bit. Here we're going to work with position and opacity at the same time. What we want to happen here is at the 4-second mark, so let me move the timeline marker over here to 4 seconds. We want the word tennis to be located exactly where it is now. But 2 seconds prior to this, at the 2-second mark, we want the word tennis to be off of the screen and slide in from the left, gaining opacity as it goes along. So we're going to be concerned with the position of that element and the opacity. So we're going to click the stopwatch for position and opacity. We've set a keyframe for each one. And at the 4-second mark, this is where this tennis element is going to be. Let's take the timeline marker backwards to the 2-second mark and tell Photoshop where we want this element to be starting from. We want this to be off of the visible screen area. So I'm going to move in the document window, hold down the Command key, that would be the Control key on Windows, to bring up the Move tool. And I'm simply going to click and drag this to the left off the screen. I'm holding down the Shift key so I drag it in a very straight fashion and let go. Now that element is off the screen, and you can see that a second keyframe here has been added in the position row. Now while we're still here at the 2-second mark, we're going to change the opacity as well. We want the opacity, instead of being 100%, we want it to start at 0%. So I'll type in a 0, hit the return enter key to commit, and we've got 2 keyframes, one for position and one for opacity. What this means is at the 2-second mark, the word tennis isn't even visible. But if we drag the timeline marker, and you can see it sliding over and gaining opacity, at the 4-second mark, it's going to be completely visible at its original location. Alright? We're going to go next to the association layer here, and we're going to do the same thing, except the word association is going to slide in from the right while gaining opacity. We want that to happen at the 6-second mark. So we're going to drag the timeline here at 6 seconds, and this again is where we want the word association to be at 6 seconds. It's in its proper place, and it's at a 100% opacity. So again, let's add a position keyframe and an opacity keyframe. Now, with our endpoint here, we can go back 2 seconds to the 4-second mark. And again, I'm going to invoke my Move tool by pressing the Command key on a Mac, the Control key on Windows, and I'm simply going to click and drag this while holding down the Shift key to bring this all the way to the right off the screen, and I'm going to change my opacity from 100% to 0%. Again, I'll show you a quick preview of what's going to happen at the 4-second mark. The word association is off the screen. It's at a 0% opacity, but over these 2 seconds, it's going to slide in, gaining opacity, and at the 6-second mark, it's going to be right where it started. Alright, now let's go to one just slightly more complicated. I'll drag up here. We're going to go to this ball layer next. I'm going to open the disclosure triangle, and again, we're going to work with position and opacity here. What we want to do is at the 8-second mark, and I'll drag the timeline marker over here to 8. Again, notice how we're always thinking of where the item is going to finally end up, and then we're moving backwards to tell Photoshop how to get it there. At the 8-second mark, we want this ball element to be located right here. It's at 100% opacity. But what we would like to happen is that as the word association slides in, we want to have this A kick the tennis ball down into this area here. How do we do that? Well, it's pretty simple. We're going to be changing position and opacity. So at this 8-second mark, we We want to add a position keyframe and an opacity keyframe. Now here what we want to do is make the ball start right here where this A finally slides in. So let's take our timeline backwards to the 6-second mark. That's where the word association is going to be fully in place. And I'm going to bring up the Move tool again with the Command key on a Mac, Control key on Windows. Click on the ball here, and I'm simply going to move it just until it kisses the A. Now, if you're finding that you're being constrained by snapping to these guides, you can hold down the Control key, and this will allow you to position the object freely. And I'm going to place it right there. So we can see that we've got a position change here. Here's our keyframe for position. And we're also going to change the starting opacity. Now this time I don't want to start the opacity at 0% because I want the ball to be slightly visible, or else it's not going to make much sense. So I'm going to change the opacity to 10%. Very light, but you'll still just be able to make out the ball. So again, we've got our second keyframe set here. And again, at the 6-second mark, the ball will be at 10% opacity. It will be kissing that A, and as it goes on to the 8-second mark, you can see how the ball is now being kicked, and at 8 seconds it's in its final resting place. Now there's one more step we need to do here with this ball layer, because unlike in the other layers, we set the starting opacity to 10% and not 0%. And that's going to bring in this layer duration bar, this green horizontal bar that goes along here. If we start with an opacity of 10% here at the 6-second mark, this keyframe set here means that everything to the left of this in terms of time is also going to show a 10% opacity. I'll show you what I mean. If I take this timeline bar and drag it over here to the left, there we are at 6 seconds. But notice that as I go backwards here, the ball is still visible. It's 10% opacity, but it's still visible on screen, and we don't want that. So how do we fix it? Well, I'm going to set the marker right back here at the 6-second mark. What we can do is take this duration bar here, this layer duration bar, simply hover the mouse over the edge of it, and you can see these left and right arrow icons show up, and we're simply going to drag this and take the dark green part all the way over to 6 seconds. What that's going to do is turn off the visibility of that entire layer all the way from 0 up to 6 seconds. So now if I drag backwards, you can see that the ball is not visible. Now we didn't have to do this in the previous examples because we had set the opacity to 0. Wherever you have a starting keyframe at 0%, that 0% carries all the way to the beginning of the animation. So this time was the first time we really had to deal with this, but it's a very simple fix. Now we're finished with the ball layer, and just one more thing to do here. We're going to go down to the Brooklyn layer. We're going to open that disclosure triangle. Let me slide down here so you can see this. What we want to do with this layer is very simple. We just want to change the opacity. We're going to have this start in at a 0 opacity and come in at the end of the animation and be at 100%. So what we need to do is take the timeline marker, drag it all the way over to the end here. We're at the 10-second mark, and we're going to set an opacity keyframe. At the 10-second mark, our opacity is at 100%, as you can verify in the Layers panel here. What we want to do is drag backwards to the 8-second mark and set an opacity of 0%. With that set, Brooklyn, New York will not show up at all until the 8-second mark, beginning at 0% opacity, and it will build up to 100%. Alright, let's close this up here, and we're finally ready to take a look at a preview. I'm going to go click on this Rewind to Beginning button here, and we're simply going to press play. And there you have our animation. Now this is going to keep cycling through or keep looping over and over again, so I'm going to press the stop button here. Now it's all well and good to be looking at this in Photoshop, but if we want to share this with the outside world, we're going to need to export this. So let's go up to the File menu, go to Export, and we're going to choose render video. What we're going to actually do is make a QuickTime movie of this. So with render video selected, we get our render video dialog box here. It gives us the default name, which is based on the actual document name. I've got my folder here selected to save it in the Chapter 9 folder. You can save yours wherever is most convenient. We're going to leave all of these options here at their defaults. We're doing a QuickTime export to QuickTime movie. It's set to animation, best quality. All of that looks fine. We're not changing anything here. The range, we've got all frames selected. Now all that's left to do is hit the render button. Now we're ready to take a look at this QuickTime movie, which will be a 10-second animation. I'm going to go over here to my QuickTime application, and I'm going to open this. Inside the Chapter 9 folder, I have fga.mov, that's the QuickTime file. I'm going to double click that to open it up, and I'm going to simply press play. And there we have it, our 10-second animation using keyframes. We've just seen how great Photoshop's 3D and video tools are. If you want to learn even more advanced 3D techniques, I highly recommend Total Training's Adobe Photoshop Mastering Advanced Techniques, hosted by Brian Moffat. There you'll explore even more of Photoshop's absolutely amazing 3D